Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to week 10 of college football. We are almost through the regular season, unfortunately, but that means we start to get into the best time of the year, which is bowl season slash playoffs, which we're about to talk about. So, welcome to week 10. Going to recap some of the storylines from week 10 and then dive into our picks and looks for the games this week. Can't wait to talk about it. Let's go. First things first. So the College Football Playoff Committee started releasing their basically who's in starting this week. So as you know, after 9 weeks of play, 10 if you count week zero, the College Football Playoff Committee, which is different than the AP poll, starts releasing not its schedule, but they're basically projections for where everybody's going to fall for the College Football Playoff. So of note, Tennessee ranked number one, which is different from the AP poll, which has Georgia number one, Ohio State number two, Georgia number three, Clemson number four. That would be the college football playoff as of right now. And if you looked ahead and we went to a 12-team playoff, you would see names like Michigan, Alabama, TCU, Oregon, USC, and then some outside contenders like Tulane and others. But you can find those on the internet if you want. That obviously does not apply for this year. Mike, do you agree with the top four, or do you have a substitute for someone in there?
I don't. I
You
don't.
don't.
I don't see how Clemson can currently be ranked ahead of Michigan, and I
Ah,
also
bang. There you go. I was going to say the same thing, but go ahead. Give me your
and I
justification.
don't. I also don't see how Alabama is ranked over TCU. I get that um, Bama's only loss is to the number one team in the ranking, but TCU has beaten a has played a gauntlet of a schedule in the Big 12, a
Yes.
probably uncharacteristically difficult schedule by the Big 12 standards, and has remained undefeated and looked very impressive doing so. So I don't really see how TCU is not getting more love. We Michigan, I think, purely by their win over Penn State would be the argument, and Clemson has wins over um, Syracuse and Wake, who were both ranked at the time, which I think is what's sort of NC State as well, which is sort of buoying their case. But their ranked wins are. But I think Michigan has looked more impressive on the whole, especially when you compare what they did to Penn State versus what Ohio State did to Penn State 2 weeks ago. So you add all that up, and those are the only ones I really disagree with. Now, it doesn't actually matter because the winner of Ohio State, Michigan, is the one that is going to get in.
Mm-hmm.
There is the possibility that the other one gets in as well if they remain a one-loss team and the other one wins the conference and finishes in the top two. Um, the so that should shake itself out. And then TCU still has to get through their schedule undefeated. The bottom line is right now if Clemson and TCU manage to run the table, the playoff will be set. It will be the SEC champion, it'll be the Big Ten champion, and it'll be those two teams. Um, there are a lot of different permutations of this that get very interesting, especially considering the fact that we haven't talked about um, the Pac-12 at all, and they have three teams currently that could all put a very strong case together for the playoff by beating the other two. Um, Oregon already did that against UCLA. They would have to do it against USC, and then either USC or UCLA would have to beat both of the other two teams um, to finish the season with one loss and thereby get into the playoffs. So there's a lot to shake out. I think by my really Andy Staples and Ari Wasserman went through it. There's 13 teams currently still alive to make the playoff in a hypothetical scenario, which is not normal. I would say it's probably a larger number than we ever would have expected. I think when they rattled it off, it was those three teams out of the Pac-12, TCU in the Big 12, um, Clemson, and North Carolina out of the ACC if they ran the table and beat Clemson and things shook out their way. Um, Bama, Ole Miss, uh, Georgia, Tennessee is four. And then in the Big Ten, you have three. You have Ohio State, Michigan, and Illinois still in the running if they were to run the table and win the Big Ten. So, um, pretty interesting conclusion to the season here as we shake out. The biggest disagreements that I had really were just where Bama is, and then giving Clemson the benefit of the doubt right now, despite the way that they've looked.
Yeah, I was going to say my biggest qualm with this is that Michigan's not ranked over Clemson. It's immaterial at this point, right? We still have a lot of football to play, especially given the Ohio State Michigan matchup, which they may play back to back essentially, and then Georgia Tennessee. Obviously, this week someone's got to lose that game technically. So you go into it and you're looking at several undefeated teams. I also agree with you. I think TCU is not getting the love they deserve, and they've played a pretty strong caliber of teams. Now I think they need to win out, and they do have a couple tough games ahead of themselves. But I would have liked to see them ranked higher than 7 coming in there undefeated, even if they are the worst undefeated team remaining. Um, but yeah, still a lot of football left to play. I think we're coming to the understanding here that one SEC team, one Big Ten team. Like I don't think anybody but a conference champion, more or less, comes out and makes the college football playoff this year. I don't see like a Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama combination, or throw Michigan in there, right? Like I don't see Ohio State and Michigan making it as we sit right now,
Yeah,
right?
that would be difficult. I think the SEC still has a very good chance. I think all they need really is either Clemson or TCU to lose, and then they've got a pretty good shot. I know that the committee values conference champions, um, and they would need probably a couple 2-loss conference champions to be guaranteed that spot.
Yep.
Um, but I think depending on, so there's a world where Georgia or Tennessee loses this game very closely, and they get in over a 1-loss conference champion with a bad loss in another conference. Um, that could, like, I think if it's between the loser of Tennessee and Georgia and Oregon, they're getting in over that team, even if Oregon wins the Pac-12, because of the way Oregon looked against Georgia to start the year. I just don't see the committee putting them in just because that loss was week 1. I mean, they lost what, 49-3, 55-3.
My only qualm with it really is I don't believe Clemson right now.
Yeah, I don't
I,
either.
I I think if you were to tell me that the top 4, regardless of what happens over the next couple of weeks, is Tennessee, Ohio State, Georgia, and Michigan, I would not be upset. As opposed to Clemson sneaks in because they're in a different, you know, conference, but then you look at their schedule and they've wins against ranked teams who didn't maybe buff out like we thought they would. Whereas Tennessee and Georgia have run a gauntlet. Ohio State and Michigan, maybe not as much of a gauntlet, but still had to play each other. Played probably very well if we're talking about it, where both of those teams should be in. So and then that's obviously counting a TCU loss somewhere in there. But I we'll see how it shakes out. I'm interested to see, but interesting first push here, seeing Tennessee number 1, and then Ohio State, which varies very much from the AP poll there.
Yeah,
Speaking of Michigan, Michigan State happened. Obviously, these two teams hate each other. We saw Michigan pretty dominant. I think the whole game, physical game, but then unfortunately, game ends. And there is a physical altercation in the tunnel between multiple Michigan State players, basically more or less caught on video assaulting a Michigan player. They both come out of the same tunnel. This kid must have come off the field late or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's not his fault for doing so. And he
yeah. I
was
think
just,
I think it was actually early based on the in-stadium video footage that he goes into the tunnel early with the Michigan State team. Again, not an excuse for what happens next, but
yeah. So 4 Michigan State players have been suspended. I
actually
really don't
eight.
think 8 now. Okay. Yeah.
8 as of yesterday, and
Jesus.
those suspensions are indefinite, pending the police and Big Ten reviews.
Right. So what's added to this is the Michigan player that got literally assaulted has retained counsel and is probably seeking punitive financial damages, up to including pressing charges. So really unfortunate for Michigan State. Obviously, the program wasn't in the best of states. No pun intended. Prior to that loss and prior to that incident, um, do you do you think this is on Mel Tucker, or is this just a bunch of kids that got out of hand?
No, I don't think this is on Mel Tucker. I think that Ohio State, or sorry, not Ohio State, Michigan State kind of waited to get their ducks in a row. I think was probably the only thing where you would say there's something more immediate should have happened. I think that you could say the same thing of the Big Ten too. Like Michigan was very outspoken about it right after it happened, as they should be. Jim Harbaugh and the AD both said they were waiting on charges from the police immediately, which I think is fair and the right response.
Yeah, I mean,
I think to not have anything that really made any sort of movement on in the public from the Big Ten or from Michigan State, besides like I think a 2 a.m. or Sunday night, like we're suspending they dumped that Sunday night in the middle of the
mhm.
afternoon window during football. Um, so I think from a PR perspective, that's their probably their only miss there. But no, I don't blame this on Mel Tucker, but I do think this sets him back and sets back part of the part of the culture shift he's trying to make, and it makes what is an already uphill battle at that school much harder, um,
Yeah,
because he's really trying to shift the culture to a perennial powerhouse recruiter, and when regardless of um, whether or not he's at fault, when you have recruits who see this happen, maybe there's some perverse people that are like, yeah, that's where I want to go play. But I think most people are going to be like, no, you're just a bunch of sore losers who can't control your emotions, and it's not going to help him on the recruiting trail. It's not going to help him in the transfer portal. It definitely hurts him much more in the transfer portal than it does on the recruiting trail. I think college players in a similar situation can really identify with that Michigan player. So I think overall, no, it's not Mel Tucker's fault, but it makes his job a whole lot harder. And it really it backs him further into a corner for a season that has really not gone the way that they sort of expected.
yeah. I didn't mean to imply that Mel Tucker was actually at fault, but
No,
yeah,
no,
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 I
no,
think
no.
it. I
I
think it
get what
makes
you're
it.
saying. Is this an indication of Mel Tucker's like
Bad
degeneration from where
performance?
they were
Yeah.
last year, or is this an isolated incident that happens to have happened during a bad season? I think it's more the latter, but it certainly doesn't make his job any easier. In fact, I think it makes it a lot harder.
Yes, I would agree. And, terrible situation all around. Just not what you want for football, not what you want to come out of that game. Pretty unfortunate and I think not fun all around. I think we'll agree. Um, moving on to some different news. I really don't know how to transition that one because very seriously, like just something that's not acceptable on or off the field.
Yeah.
Brian Harson was relieved as the Auburn head coach as of about 48 hours ago. Um, after less than 2 years with the team, obviously started rocky after the end of the first season. Allegations of him sleeping with an assistant started popping up at the tail end of last season. And then his performance or his team's performance this year left a lot to be desired. Uh, I have a little stat for you, Mike. Auburn has paid $37 million in football head coach buyouts in the past 687 days. That's about $55,000 per day for 600 plus days. Not good. Is Auburn a program you could see someone being desired at? Like,
It's
is
not.
Auburn a step up from? I hear the phrase Lane Kiffin being passed around by a lot of Auburn fans. Do you think he makes the jump, or do you think anyone really makes the jump, given Auburn's current status?
So here's another stat, and again, I'll credit Ari Wasserman and Andy Staples. I heard this on Sunday, that they listed all the buyouts that have been paid this year, and then if you added all of them up, added Gus Malzahn's buyout, and then added $15 million, that would be Jimbo's buyout. so, um, so that's another fun stat. I don't mean to keep taking shots at Texas A&M. It is just very
Oh, they
funny.
deserve it. Fuck it.
But so yeah, everyone I've met from Texas A&M is part of the cult. They really don't, and then they don't know they're in a cult, which is even funnier. No, I kicked this question around a lot in my head, and I think like I've landed on, well, will Lane Kiffin leave? I don't think Lane Kiffin will leave for Auburn because he's got a roughly similar job that has way less pressure. Any success he has is icing on the cake, and he could just the people say he wants to leave because he's not satisfied living in Oxford, Mississippi. First of all, no matter what SEC school he goes to, if Lane's interest is chasing around co-eds on top of coaching college football, he can go to any college in the SEC and have that reality. Secondly, if he's leaving for an upgrade in quality of life, moving from Oxford, Mississippi to Auburn, Alabama is not the move that we're talking about here. So I don't. That's not a factor. So throw those two out. If you look at it just from a football perspective, I don't see what the appeal of going to Auburn is unless you say that at Auburn you can win a national championship, which I think becomes less and less of a reality by the day in this world. Now I get that they have money. They are in a good state. So is Lane for recruiting
Yeah.
purposes.
So is Texas.
Yeah. So I I don't see how Lane's situation is better when you factor in all of the administrative drama, and they just hired a new president. I get it. They're announcing they just hired Mississippi State's AD, so they're changing the regime there. But the donor base was the problem with Harsin, and it's still going to be there regardless of who's in charge now. So when you factor all that in, you factor in that similar to Florida when they fired Dan Mullen last year, you're trying to get a guy who's going to be willing to go recruit and battle it out against Kirby Smart and Nick Saban for the best players in the country. But you're in a situation where not only you currently behind them, but your historical and built-in advantages are not there to catch up to them. So you ultimately end up with a situation where I don't see how you get out from under the pressure of trying to satisfy a donor base that expects you to win and win big, and having competitive disadvantages that almost inherently keep you from doing that. Now somehow Gene Chizik managed to do it, so I guess it is possible. But and I know that watching UNC's defense, particularly at the beginning of this year, I have no idea how Gene Chizik pulled that off. But the answer really, here's the answer: is Cam Newton got caught stealing laptops at Florida, got dismissed, went to community college, and then decided for some reason to go to Auburn, Alabama, and then they ended up with maybe the best college football quarterback in history. That's how Gene Chizik.
Mm-hmm.
But how often is lightning going to strike like that? And Gus, they may have screwed up in firing Gus Malzahn because he was the only person in the SEC that was beating Nick Saban consistently. So I just don't see who you're pulling at Auburn that you're going to get that's going to one be willing to do that job in the way that they expect it to be done, and two is actually capable of doing that job in the way that they expect it to be done. So and all I say all that removed from with all those pressures and like I said all those built-in disadvantages, I don't think it's a good job to take for somebody because it, uh, I don't know whose end goal is to go to Auburn and be the coach of Auburn. I don't. Is Auburn a desirable job enough historically, currently, resource wise, to make it a end all, top of the line? I'm done here. I'll go here and then I'll retire sort of job. To me, I don't look at Auburn that way. Maybe other people do, but the way I look at it, it's just
I
that's
think
the
there's
problem with Auburn right now.
I think there's a lot of prestige there. I do think that they have a lot of money. Like all the things are there, right? But if you look in the grand scheme, I don't know what coaches are available that aren't already in the SEC that are going to want to make that jump. As you're adding Oklahoma, as you're adding Texas, who arguably is going to have one of the best quarterbacks, at least that we think coming up, right, back to back. So it's very possible Texas has another 7 good years of quarterback play left to then recruit on top of, right?
Yeah,
Like I
and
don't.
Alabama now has three top 300 quarterbacks committed in the next 2 years, so they're not going anywhere either.
Right, right. So like you have all this and then you look at the issues that they've had on and off the field. I agree with you. I don't know if it's desirable, but maybe if someone's super ambitious they could get it or if they're an Auburn grad or were a fan, but I don't know looking out into the spectrum of coaches available who that is, right? Because what Power 5 team has a coach that doesn't want to go to Nebraska, doesn't want to go anywhere else, but is ready to make the jump to the SEC? Like I just of all the positions that are currently open, I don't know that you look at Auburn and go, that's somewhere I can immediately succeed. And given the history of the coaches that they've hired, that I would have the time to build a program there. I think that also plays into the culture. And I blame the AD more so than anybody or the previous AD, right? But if you fire three coaches in 700 days, like people are going to ask questions like, do I want to get fired in 2 years? And if maybe you want a sweet buyout, but these coaches don't get in it for the money, they get in it to win. So if you have a program that is otherwise prestigious, but you're not sticking with your coach as they like basically throw them out every 2 years over the past 6 years, like that's not going to be a program that's desirable. And I think that's an issue for Auburn. I think whoever they find, whoever they take in, I don't know that he'll have the immediate support of the fans because they're very frustrated, and also like expecting him to come on the scene and win immediately is a strong take. And this is the same thing we saw with like the Scott Frost things. Like if you're going to fire Brian Harsin week 9 in his second year, and all off season you're talking about off field, on field issues, whatever, just fire the guy.
Hmm.
Like don't waste an extra 10 weeks and half a year. Get rid of them if it's a bad hire. But a lot of these programs like stick with it, but then they only stick with it for like halfway through the season. It kind of blows my mind. Like I don't understand buyouts. You know, regardless, like I don't understand why you wouldn't either a stick with Brian Harsin through the rest of the year and then tell him after the final game he's been relieved of duty, or b at least allow him to do an Ed-O and finish out the season and be like, hey, we're not going to bring you back, but yeah, one of those things has to happen, and it's very disappointing. Obviously, I'm not an Auburn fan, but it's very disappointing to see them react to the way they did about Brian Harsin and then immediately delve into, well, this is a top 3 school that you'd want to coach at. It's like, is it with the way you've treated coaches? Just kind of
Yeah.
blows my mind a little bit.
Yeah, I don't see how it's a desirable job in that way. I agree with you, and they drummed up, like you said, the allegations were total BS, and that came out pretty quickly, I think, and it seemed like by most reporting that was just an effort to try to find something,
Excuse
something.
for
Well,
cause.
really, what they wanted was a for cause firing, so that they wouldn't have to pay this buyout,
Right.
which is a terribly scummy thing to do. So like, so if you're a coach with any prestige or attractiveness, and Auburn calls and you call some people around the program and you realize that if things don't go right the first year, are they going to make up rumors of infidelity in your marriage to try to get you fired so they don't have to pay your buyout? Like it just it smells it's not indicative of a well functioning organization. Um, but and we can put a bow on it here. A name I haven't heard anybody talk about, and I would be curious to see if it happens again because it has happened to the last two coaches at this school. If I'm Auburn, I call Dan Lanning. He's the only coach that I can think of right now that has coordinator experience in the SEC. That if you're looking for the guy who has succeeded the way that Kirby has succeeded, that Nick Saban has succeeded, that comes from that tree, the Jimbo coaching tree, the Saban coaching tree, and that is a known that was hired to be a recruiter that's not afraid of the SEC, that may be willing to move back. Dan Lanning is probably the only guy I can think of. And when you look
Yeah.
at what he's done at Oregon the back half of this year, even after the start he got off to against Georgia, which nobody expected him to even be competitive in that game anyway. So I think you look at what he's done in taking that program and adding toughness to them, and then winning on the recruiting trail too. Um, I think he's got it. You have to at least call him. Now, if I'm him, I don't. I absolutely don't consider it, but he's got to be at least a phone call away, and we can move on from there.
Yeah. No, I don't hate that take. Okay, so Wake Forest. This is a fun little one. Wake Forest set what we believe is a college football record. Right? They had 6 turnovers in one quarter, 8 turnovers total.
In the
Uh,
second, 8 turnovers in the second half. They didn't have a turnover before halftime.
which is not good.
No, it's not. Let me. The game was so the I gotta find the drive summaries because it's just so funny to read. They had
Yes. So Wake
three
Forest goes.
interceptions and three punts in uh, 3 interceptions and 3 punts in their 6 drives in the third quarter.
Yeah. So Wake gets routed by Louisville, who is objectively not a bad football team.
They started
But
terrible. They have since gotten better.
yes, very much so. And now they're playing NC State this week. But do you? I mean, is that just one of those bury the tapes, dig a hole, throw the
Yeah.
tape in there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Bury the football, move on.
Stab the football, get rid of it, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and you need to do that if you're Wake, because here's your next 3 games, right? You are bowl eligible if you're Wake Forest right now, um, at 6-2. But your next 3 games is at NC State, UNC at home, and Syracuse at home, all which are ranked. And then you finish up with your rival Duke in late November. But that could be the determinant between, a 10-2, maybe New Year's Eve bowl kind of appearance, and what could very well be like we're 7-5 and we get the whatever bowl.
Duke's Mayo.
Yeah, the Duke's Mayo. I saw a tweet where it was the Lockheed Martin Armed Services Saudi Arabia Ally Bowl, which made me laugh at the second part. But yeah, Wake has 6 turnovers, setting a record. I think that was very funny on a lighter note.
So, before we get into this week's games, here it is. They threw a pick six to start the quarter, then fumbled. Louisville turned the ball back over on downs. They then went 7 plays before fumbling again. Louisville turned that into a touchdown. After 5 plays, they threw a pick. Louisville turned that into a touchdown on 1 play. Then they got the ball back. 2 plays later, they fumbled again. Louisville turned that into a touchdown. Then they managed to punt. And then with one, actually, here it is. With the last play of the third quarter, Sam Hartman threw a pick six for a touchdown. So that's 1, 2, 3 picks, 2 of which were pick sixes, and 3 fumbles in 1 quarter. Oh, and then like I said, 8 turnovers in the second half. Their next 2 drives were also turnovers. So they went fumble on the next drive and then interception on the drive after that. So in 9 drives, they went pick six, fumble, pick, fumble, punt, pick six, fumble, pick six. Or sorry, interception. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. It's like, it's not a knock on Wake. It's just hilarious.
Yeah, I mean that's not good. That's one of those bury the football and move on. Well, Speaking of moving on, let's move on to some games. We got 5 games lined up. One you might not expect for us to talk about, which we'll talk about first. But really great slate of college football this week. Really great. And we're, by the way, Mike, I meant to wish you a happy Maction. If you're watching this right now, as of last Thursday, so this past week, we forgot to talk about it, but there was a college football or NFL game on every single day of the week, thanks to the Mid-Atlantic Conference. So shout out to the MAC for putting on Tuesday, Wednesday college football games for us. All right, first game we're going to talk about, Air Force at Army. Army is +7. The over-under is 40.5. Kickoff is at 11:30 Eastern. We're talking about this game because this is the Commander's Cup. So Air Force beat Navy. If Air Force beats Army, they will retain the Commander in Chief's trophy, which is the trophy competed against for all three service academies of the United States military. So the Air Force Academy, the West Point, and then um, the Naval Academy as well. So if Army wins this game and comes out on top, they will then play Navy. If they beat Navy, Army will have it. If Air Force beats Army, Air Force will have it. And then if Army beats Air Force but loses to Navy, it'll be a tie that is shared between the programs. Do you, Michael, Army's +7, over unders 40.5? Do you have anything you want to mention about this game? Because I do. I have something interesting that I think people are going to bet, and I would discourage them from betting a certain way.
No, I don't. Other than I, uh, Army's not as good as they normally are, but Andre Carter is a legit NFL prospect, and so if you are watching Army football this weekend, look out for number 34 in the defense. He is a stud. He will probably be drafted and released from his West Point contract to go play in the NFL. So that's my fun fact.
Yeah. So I have a play for this, and it's the over. And I know what people are thinking because if you have been gambling for more than 5 seconds, you know that Service Academy unders are very popular. However, Air Force has a pretty potent offense. Army has hit the over multiple times this year. They also have been relying a lot more on the pass as opposed to the triple option, which is why they were so attractive for the under for so many years. And when you would have two triple option teams play each other, the under would hit almost certainly. Well, the line opened at 48, and it has since dropped to most books to 40.5 because that's how heavily people are betting the under. If you haven't betted already, you don't have a good line at 40 or 41. So I would say take the over in hopes that these two teams score. Last year's matchup between Army and Air Force did go to overtime, got to about 35, 36 points. So there is precedent that this game, there can be some points in this game. Both these teams can score. I do see this over at 40 points, but that's just me.
Here's a stat that'll back you up on Army. Air Force has been very good offensively this year. They throw the ball well. Not every Army game this year, the winner has scored more than 30 points.
There you go.
And
Seriously, Army has played very well
and in
on
each of
offense, and so has
each
Air
of
Force.
those games, the loser has scored more than 10 points.
See, I'm a
So every
genius.
game has gone over the total for this game that Army has played in.
See, there you go.
Every game Army has played, the combined teams have scored more than 40 points,
Yeah,
including when they played Villanova when they won 49-10.
yeah, and so Air Force doesn't really run the triple option either. So like people are going to be don't expect two triple option teams. Army's been throwing the ball more. Their quarterback has an arm that's pretty decent. Again, don't expect this to be the old um, academy games where you're seeing like 15 points total. Um, Next game, probably the biggest game of the week. Don't know if you disagree with
Might be
that,
the
Mike.
biggest game of the year.
It actually might be the biggest game of the year, aside from the much anticipated Ohio State Michigan game. Tennessee at Georgia. Georgia's -8, over under 65.5. Kickoff is the 3:30 Eastern time kickoff for the SEC game of the week. Mike, have any picks? I'm very excited for this game. I will be ready and willing to watch this hours before kickoff, but I'm
Yeah,
curious as to
this
whether
is
you
going to
have a
be
play or
fun.
not.
I so big loss for Georgia. Nolan Smith is out, their best pass rusher. Now you could argue it doesn't matter because the way they've recruited, um, there's so many pass rushers and defensive linemen, defensive prospects that they've always been able to gap fill. But losing a first round pick in a game this big is not ideal. that being said, I like Georgia because of their experience in this spot, especially on offense. Games at home, which is big for Georgia. Um, I think Tennessee is going to see a very different challenge offensively than they've faced most of this year. And I think this game is going to be a lot of fun. I'm not saying Georgia wins um, easily. I think Georgia ultimately wins this game. But I think it's very close. Hendon Hooker has been playing very good ball, but I think Georgia will be extremely fired up for this game. Um, and one of their first home games in a while that has had this sort of magnitude and energy because they last year they played a relatively easy SEC schedule. They never get Florida at home. It's always a neutral site game. They went to Tennessee last year. They had I think Kentucky at home, but the biggest game I think they had at home last year was that Arkansas game in like week 5 when they just dismantled Arkansas from the start.
Yeah, I would agree
Um,
with that. I don't think they really had a home game that was super, super like
important.
crazy after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I add all that up and I say I think Georgia is going to keep this game competitive. I 8 is a lot. I don't like the spread where it is now. But what I do like is the under. 66 is a lot of points. I get these two teams can score. I know what Tennessee did to Bama's defense, but Bama's defense has looked susceptible all year. Now, you could say they had better pass rushers, but they definitely haven't played better than Georgia's defense has played this year. So I think that this game is going to be a and the other thing too is Georgia has a lot of experience preparing for teams that play quickly because they knew that's what Alabama was going to do to them last year in the national title game, and they ended up countering it pretty well the second time they played it. So I think Kirby will rely on a lot of that game plan. Plus, they're more athletic defensively this year without Jordan Davis. Um, so I add all that up. I think Georgia wins. I don't think they win by 8. Not I'm not willing to take it strong enough to take them or to take Tennessee against the spread. But what I will say is I like the under here. I think this game stays under 66. So I'm going to play that. The books or the Vegas money is with me here. The over is a 68% of the tickets are on the over, but 66% of the money is on the under. And PFF has the value on the under as well. I'll get you the true line in a second.
So I'll step in while you look at the true line. I don't hate the under there. I'm gonna probably take Tennessee with the points. I just think outside of a touchdown, um, yeah, I still like Tennessee. I think Georgia's very good, but I think Tennessee is in that mode where this is like you got to win kind of mentality. I'm not so going to go so far to sprinkle the money line, although I do think Tennessee could pull out a win in an upset. But I'm gonna lay the number, take 8 points, see how this game kind of turns out because Tennessee is playing their ass off, and I don't want to be sitting on the wrong side of that outside of 8 points. I think if this was 6.5, it'd be different. I think with 8 and you win, even with a touchdown loss, I think I'm going to take the 8 points and see how this game turns out.
The PFF has their total at 64.8. It's almost a full point under the current market line. So
Okay.
I like the under.
Moving on to another star-studded, hateful game. Alabama at LSU. LSU's plus 13 over unders 56 and a half. Kickoff is at 7 p.m. at LSU. This is going to be a fucking awesome game. I'll say it right now. I'm taking LSU with the points. Alabama has not played anyone in the SEC that is ranked very well this year, with the exception of I think maybe
Tennessee.
Kentucky, Tennessee. Well, no, they. I wouldn't say they played Tennessee well. I think they played them like
Oh,
shit and they lost.
played them well. I thought you meant
Yeah.
well ranked. Yes.
No, no,
No,
no,
they
no.
haven't
So
played anybody particularly well in the games they've played.
Yeah, and I think Alabama's having a down year for what their talent level is. I don't think that's an understatement, but if you look at the good teams Alabama's played, they've really struggled. Texas, they beat them by 1 point. They only beat A&M by 4 points, and we've seen A&M's a dumpster fire. They got beat by Tennessee. I mean, look, they put up numbers against Arkansas and Mississippi State, but that's not something you don't expect. I think LSU, we might have been skewed by their early performance in the year. I think Chip Kelly's found that groove. 13 points is a lot of points at night with drunk LSU fans screaming their heads off in Death Valley. Give me 13 points, and I will see how this game turns out. But I love LSU in this spot.
You convinced me to take Bama off the card. I originally had Bama. I really like Bama in this spot. This feels like a spot. Once again, I mean, people don't get rich betting against Bama. This feels like it feels like
Well,
Bama
this year
really.
they kind of have.
Yeah, I
I
know.
think
I know.
Alabama's like even or losing money if you took them against the spread every week.
They are. I'll tell you right now. They are.
They probably covered Utah State. They didn't cover Texas. They might have covered
They're
LA
they're
Monroe.
5-3 against the spread, but those three probably all came in the matchups you referenced. So,
Correct.
um, no, I think Bama wins this game. I think they win it pretty convincingly. I maybe not 2 touchdowns, which is why I'm going to take it off the board. But to to the point of Bama not playing well against really good teams, LSU has not particularly impressed against top flight competition. They beat Ole Miss pretty well, and they beat Mississippi State pretty well at home, but they got embarrassed by Tennessee. They didn't
Which
play for
everybody has so far.
Yes, yes. Besides Alabama, um,
I would say Alabama losing to Tennessee was in itself an embarrassment
eh,
If you're an Alabama fan, you're embarrassed by that.
at the time, I don't think now we would say that, but
Correct.
um,
So I'll interject one more thing here. That supports LSU plus 13. Alabama's next matchup is also an away game at Mississippi. So they go LSU to Mississippi. Not that they're in a look ahead against a 15 ranked team, but that's a gauntlet of back to back weeks. They may in fact be looking ahead a little bit.
I I think my biggest my thought was Bama normally wins these matchups convincingly. They like beating LSU. They enjoy beating LSU, and it's Brian Kelly who Nick Saban has dominated whenever they met in the playoff. Now, granted, that
That's
probably
true.
has more to do with the players on the field than the two guys on the sidelines, but it still holds. I'm going to take it off the card. I do think Bama wins this game. There's a good chance LSU covers, so I'm not going to play it. I do like it. No plays on the total.
Okay. Moving on. Texas at Kansas State, 7 p.m. kickoff. Kansas State is 2.5 point underdogs at home. Over under is 54.5. Michael, our next game. What do you
Um,
like?
I like Texas.
I
Dare
love
I say,
Texas.
love Texas
I
more
love
than
Texas
that.
in this spot too.
Um, K State's coming off a really impressive performance against Oklahoma State, an
Yeah,
absolutely
my
dominant
worst pick of the year.
performance. Yeah. Um, just we needed one touchdown to hit the over in that game. We couldn't get it.
Don't remind me.
But Texas hasn't particularly impressed the past 2 games, but they should be the better team in this game. I get the games at K State. I get that everybody in the Big 12 likes to beat Texas. I still think Texas comes out. I think they have the superior talent on the field. I think Quinn Ewers starts to find his groove. Bijan Robinson has run the ball well on the road this year. I think their offense travels. Um, I like Texas here minus 2.5. And now the only thing I don't like is the fact that Texas is favored. That is not great for us because it gives K State some motivation to bring and some bulletin board material to put in the locker room and say, "Hey, we're still underdogs despite what we did to Oklahoma State last week. Let's do it again." If Kansas State were favored here, I would be this would be like a game of the year sort of play.
Yeah, I like Texas in this spot. Texas is fighting for multiple things. One, a good bowl game still. Two, to get ranked, which they're currently not, against a Kansas State team that comes off a dominant win against Oak State, but I think that's a spot for a letdown, even knowing that you're underdogs, or maybe they just don't know and they're going into it thinking they're going to dominate. I think it'll be a great game. I think it's the game to watch, along with the next game we're going to talk about, and that 7 p.m. time slate. I mean, 7 p.m. time slate for this week is phenomenal with just these three games alone. Um, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to take Texas though -2.5. I think Texas can dominate Kansas State on both sides of the ball, and I think Kansas State is due for another loss to bring them to 6-3 and kind of knock them back down to earth. Last game we'll talk about before getting into picks: Clemson at Notre Dame. Notre Dame is +3.5. Over under is 44.5. 7:30 kick. Michael, who do you like?
I like Notre Dame money line.
Ooh,
I
yes, let's go. I love this.
I
Give me your
this
reasoning.
was we talked before we started recording, and I told you I had a pick that I thought would surprise you. Maybe not. It was money line. This is it.
This is
I have
surprising to
been
me.
I have been down on Clemson all year. They have regressed to the mean offensively. Notre Dame has started to pick up momentum with a couple of decent wins against BYU. The Stanford game was a hiccup, but against Syracuse, they looked particularly efficient on the road. Now they come home in a game that is really going to mean a lot for their season, and Marcus Freeman needs a signature win. I think if he's the motivator that he has seemed to be all year, or at least in the offseason when he was hired, this is a game they get completely up for. Like this, the stadium should be rocking. This should be a crazy environment for Notre Dame football, and I think what's pointing me more towards this is their second to last home game. Their last home game is against Boston College, and then they go to USC. If
Right for the
USC was at home, if they were playing USC at home, I don't like Notre Dame nearly as much. But the fact that this is their second to last game at home this year,
at
and
night.
it's
It's their
and it's
last night
against
game. Yep.
yeah, it's a night game against Clemson. They will be losing their minds for this game. I think that this is going to be a war. I think Notre Dame finds a way to win this game, knocks Clemson off their pedestal. Granted, Clemson, this is the last test for Clemson this year. So Clemson needs to have all their eggs in their basket this year. But Notre Dame has the kind of defense that can get to Uiagalelei. I've seen that defense in person. They have really good pass rushers. They rush the quarterback well. They're going to force him to make decisions off schedule. I think if this game turns into a defensive struggle, like I think it could, then there's a chance that Clemson has to turn to Klubnik again. And I don't think this is the spot that you want to have to do that. And if they do, they could be in trouble. I'm basically hedging, not hedging, I'm going all in on my DJ is not the quarterback we thought he was. This is the game where it happens. I let Notre Dame has to feel disrespected with the fact that teams they've beaten are ranked and they are not. Particularly my school, North Carolina is ranked 17th. Notre Dame beat them by 2 touchdowns here and is still not ranked. I think this is the game that Notre Dame gets up for. I think they walk into this game motivated, and I think they pick off Clemson, and that's why I like them. They're plus 153 on the money line, and I'm not gonna when I drive to Virginia to place this bet. I will not be. It will not be the full amount, but I will be placing a decent. Let's put a decent wager on Notre Dame to win this game outright because I think this
Oh,
is the spot where they do it.
I love your reasoning. I had Notre Dame +3.5. I'm gonna change that to Notre Dame money line. I also really like the over here. I know these are good defenses, uh, but 44.5 just seems a little low. I know that's like such a cop out, but I don't see either of these teams not scoring 20. Now whether it's 21-21 and the bet loses, meh, but I think you can get these teams over 21 points each, pushing that 44-45 point limit. Okay, well those are our picks for the big games of this week. Mike, run me through the rest of your card.
All right, I'll try to go quickly here. I like Maryland +5 going to Wisconsin. We have said all year Maryland is good. Wisconsin has been meh. I think Maryland has a much better offense. Wisconsin's defense can't be that much fixed. So I like Maryland with the points on the road. They're still 6-2, and nobody's talking about them in the Big 12, and they're playing pretty well. So I like.
They have the second most AP poll votes for a team that is not ranked, if I'm not mistaken.
And they're and they are the 32nd ranked power ranked team overall by PFF, 13th ranked offense, and PFF has the line at 0.8 points closer to a pick 'em than the market does. I add all that up and I say Maryland should be the better team here. I get that they're on the road on a particularly long travel day for them, but I really like Maryland here. I'm going to take UNC minus 7.5 at Virginia because they're my team, but I don't like it, and I would not pick it. In fact, I would go the other way. UNC is on the road in a look-ahead spot against a team that has had a decent offense coming into the year, coming off a big home win against Pitt. I don't like UNC in the spot at all, but they're my boys, so I got to take it. I do think they win. Virginia's not good. I just don't know if they cover 7.5. Kentucky, I'm going to take Kentucky -1 coming off a loss. They are at Missouri. Missouri looked pretty good against South Carolina. Kentucky did not look good against. They did not look good against Tennessee at all. But they're still not a bad team. I think they just ran into a buzzsaw with a lot of energy. And Tennessee, that was a cathartic win for Tennessee against a Kentucky team that's been better than them at a sport that Tennessee prides itself on being better than Kentucky at year in and year out. I think Tennessee kind of ran up the score there because they've lost to Kentucky so often over the past few years. So I don't think that's indicative of how good Kentucky is as a team. Missouri did just beat South Carolina, but Missouri's not good. And Kentucky is decent. They should win this game. This spread would never be 1 point if last week hadn't happened. All that adds up. I like Kentucky.
I see them at a pick 'em.
Yeah. So I don't know. That shouldn't be that way. So take Kentucky. Ohio State -38. Once again, this is all reflective of their last game. Penn State, they played a lot closer than they should have. Northwestern just lost by 20 to Iowa. They lost by 20 to Iowa. They're bad.
That's impressive given that Iowa had like its first offensive touchdown against them.
Iowa going into last week had less offensive touchdowns than Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver for Ohio State.
Yeah, this
Ohio State -38. Baylor +3.5 at Oklahoma. I think Baylor's.
We have the same picks.
Yeah,
we have all the same picks.
Baylor's been kind of flying under the radar since they're a little bit of a rough start, especially in the Big 12. I think that they're going to start to round into form towards the end of the season here. Dave Aranda's a good coach. I think Oklahoma's sort of steadied the ship, but this is a game that I don't think they win. I like Baylor to keep this within a field goal. There's a chance Oklahoma wins this game. I think it'll be a very tight game. We talked about Tennessee, Notre Dame, Texas. I also like Florida State -7.5. They're playing Miami. Okay. Miami barely beat Virginia, got embarrassed by Duke, lost to Middle Tennessee, and lost to North Carolina at home.
They're bad. We got to talk about that next week. Miami is bad.
Real bad. So Miami, I get it, -7.5. Florida State, decent line. They've been pretty good this year. Jordan Travis is a good quarterback. I think Florida State has not necessarily had the chance to really abuse Miami the way that they would enjoy doing. This is a very heated rivalry. Very heated rivalry. And Florida State will relish any opportunity, similar to Tennessee, Kentucky last week. If they have a chance to run up the score, they're going to. So I really like Florida State to put it on Miami this week. And then I'm going to ride with you on the Air Force Army over 40.
Okay, so I had LSU +13, Texas -2.5, Tennessee +8, Army Air Force over 40.5, over 44.5, Notre Dame Clemson, Notre Dame money line, as we all just talked about in the other games. I also have TCU minus 9.5 against Texas Tech. TCU's at home. They're a very good team. I'm going to start putting respect on their name. They play Texas the following week, but I don't think TCU, with an undefeated record, knowing that they cannot lose a game to get to the college football playoffs, have a look ahead at any point in the rest of the season.
I agree.
So there's 4 games left. TCU's going to dominate at home before going to Texas and then Baylor. Texas Tech is either hot or cold, and the only time they've been hot is when they played Texas, when they really hate that team. I think Texas Tech gets routed like they did last week at TCU. Ohio State, you covered it, minus 38.5. They're going to dominate. I also believe in Kentucky. Kentucky in a pick 'em. I see them at a pick 'em. I'm going to take a money line just to, depending on what the odds are with the VIG. But Kentucky is a good football program. You got to discount last week getting their ass kicked and just kind of roll with the punches. Tennessee's a very good team. Kentucky will come in and try and embarrass Missouri just because it's an SEC team. It's a fellow SEC team, and they need to get over that hump. They're otherwise a decent team. I'm with you on Baylor. Oklahoma's trash. They're really bad. I don't understand why Baylor's 3.5 points. I'll take a field goal and a half any day with that matchup, especially with how Baylor dominated Texas Tech, like I talked about. They're also pretty hot. The only loss they've had was a disappointing loss to West Virginia over the past 5 weeks, and then they lost in overtime to BYU, who we've learned is not that great. Baylor, I think, sneaky should be ranked, to be honest with you, based on their schedule and who they played. I have Memphis plus 3.5 against UCF. UCF coming off of a big win, so you have that bit of a letdown, and they're also looking ahead next week at Tulane. Memphis played well against Tulane at home. Tulane was at home last week. They lost by 10, although they got dominated in the first half and then almost came back to win in the second half. But Memphis isn't a terrible team. They'll be at home. UCF kind of has a look ahead, and it's in a bit of a letdown from the previous week. So that combined, give me 3.5 points with Memphis. Going into it, NC State is at home against Wake. I'm going to take the 4.5 points against Wake. I don't think NC State's a terrible team. I don't think Wake, like we've kind of talked about, is a terrible team, although they got embarrassed last week. I think both these teams have a tough schedule, but Wake has a much tougher schedule for the rest of the year. So give me 4.5 points against Wake with the Wolfpack. And then finishing up, I'm going to go back to a team that I was very disappointed in last week that I was otherwise a believer in, Oklahoma State minus 1.5 at Kansas. I don't know what the fuck that was that they did last Saturday at Kansas State, but that wasn't football. They were trash. Kansas State put 48 points on the board. Oklahoma State put none. I had the money line. It's the worst bet I've made this year. Give me Oklahoma State bouncing back minus 1.5. I think the line is skewed just because of that past performance. That's my card. Mike, anything to add?
Nope.
All right, well, that's been Stupid versus Spread for college football week 10. Go like and subscribe, and then follow us for our pro football content as well. We do one episode each week. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.